Hello and welcome back to No Bullshit. Today we return to talking about the current health scare going on here in America. Recently we've had to close a lot of things down, as has most of the world. This current pandemic has been going on and on for months now, and as things slowly start to reopen here in the United States, we start to reflect on things and think about what happened and how we got here, and most importantly, why the blame seems to be placed on other places. Now, I'm not trying to play the blame game specifically myself, but I do get rather defensive when I see liberals time and time again try to blame this on the conservatives and Trump. This is clearly not our problem. This isn't something Trump originated. This came from a very Far East country who's very biased and terrible and corrupt and covered in communism. We're of course talking about that Far East Middle Kingdom nation known as China, or as Trump would call them, China. And in today's story, we're going to discuss how China is using our own identity politics and the left-leaning SJW PC culture here in America. And well, they're using that stuff against us pretty effectively, actually. Beijing, the capital of China, where their government is centered and everything, and Beijing has kind of taken note that identity and race and gender and everything has become real important here in America, especially in recent years. This is, of course, in response to people like Barack Obama, the former president, other high-profile liberals, all getting very focused on your identity. They are all about identity politics. It's all about what's your skin color, what's your background, where are you from. They don't care who you are, what you have to say, and what you've accomplished. It's all about the way you were born. And China has smartly, in a way it's also terrible and corrupt, and we're going to go against it. It's not a good thing, but we're calling it out because in a way, in a lot of ways, Beijing has used these identity politics against us as a way to deflect the blame they have for this current pandemic. Of course, this pandemic started in this Far East nation in a lab over there, and it's spread across the world now, and in response, they did a couple of terribly bad things. First of all, they tried to cover it up. They tried to hide it and make it like it didn't happen. They pretended there was nothing going on, even though there was a lot of outbreaks in their country, which resulted in it breaking out into the rest of the world. So there was that initial cover-up, and now there's the following cover-up, because now it's everywhere. Everyone knows about it, and the plan is China wants to kind of deflect that blame and maybe blame it on America, blame it on Trump. That actually happened at the beginning at one point. The Chinese were trying to say Trump and American soldiers had caused the virus, and this is what caused Trump to clap back and say, hey, this isn't us, this is a Chinese virus. And then people called Trump racist, of course, yada, yada, yada. But that's what's brought us here today. You see, they want to invoke this idea that Asians are a protected minority, even though they're a majority in the world. There's a billion Asians, like 3 times as many Americans, and many other things too. There's Chinese people all over the place. The Asian people are a big majority in the world. But since they're a minority in our country, and they realize we adhere to a lot of identity politics, not by choice, I don't like it, but it's definitely there, we got to admit. So China is taking advantage of that and using that minority status to give them victim status. And then in addition, they're also putting a lot of female characters up front, like in their news, like in their propaganda videos, which you can see on Twitter and other places. And in addition, female Chinese reporters have infiltrated the White House press room and have asked Trump a number of silly questions. Sometimes they're American Chinese females, like Americanized ones like Wei Zhejiang from CBS, and other times they're straight out of China from a Chinese outlet in the back of the room asking Trump something, just out of nowhere, totally playing the victim card because they're Asian, because they're female, and because the liberals will let them get away with it. The liberals love far leftists like China. They love the communists. So this is all part of their ploy. And I found an interesting article with more details on it. This was on Twitter from Kathy He. It says, Beijing is very manipulative in the sense of tapping into the race, class, gender, progressive identity politics. They can somehow pose as a victim, even though they were the victimizer in the crisis. This is a quote from historian V.D. Hansen on Am Thought Leader. So we'll get to this article a little bit soon. But right out the gate, that's a good point. I mean, they're playing the victim when they're really the victimizer. They're the ones that caused this thing to happen in the world. I mean, you could say it's an accident. There's questions about the actual sort of reasoning behind creating this and spreading it, but Either way, best case scenario, it was accidental, but that's still an accident, still gets blamed on the people who created the accident. Instead, though, they're trying to blame Trump, just like how the liberals try to blame Trump and say he's not responding to this good enough or whatever. I mean, that's total BS, and it's total deflection because they're trying to defend this Far East nation. This article seems to have more details. It says, Beijing exploits identity politics to deflect pandemic blame, expert says. The Chinese regime has leveraged identity politics in the West to deflect attention from its role in causing the global pandemic, according to historian Victor Davis Hanson. Over the past few months, Beijing has deployed an aggressive information campaign aimed at shaping the narrative surrounding the pandemic in its favor. So yeah, I can't read all that article since you have to sign up, but the point stands there. I think you guys get it. China is taking advantage of our identity politics, of the liberal leaders in our country, and they're just kind of using them to turn people against us. And we've seen this in a lot of ways. Like I was talking about the press room stuff, we've covered those press conferences extensively, and that's something I noticed in another video that actually got me dinged too, because you're not allowed to talk about female reporters apparently, but those female reporters in the press room are playing that game too. They're using identity politics, they're using their femalehood and their minority status to give them a sort of shield. And that's what China's doing here too. And it kind of doesn't make sense, as I also said, because China's not a minority in the world. Actually, Americans and white people and European descendants would be far more of a minority. But since we're talking about things in the scope of the Western world and we're in America right now, we're reading things on Twitter, we're talking about our own propaganda stuff getting pushed on us, and that's how things have turned out. It's also important to note that this article is coming from a historian named Victor Davis Hanson. Looks like he wrote The Case for Trump, a sort of pro-Trump book. He's a senior fellow at the Hoover Institute, Classics in Military History. Latest book is The Case for Trump. Victor Hanson, thank you, President. Book releases on March 5th. Looks like the president tweeted his book. So he's obviously a supporter. He knows what's going on, but he's also a historian with some credibility. And we're talking about China. We're talking about a country that hates us and has sent this terrible virus after us, and they're hiding behind this victimhood. They're using identity politics. Identity politics are terrible. This is a bad situation for us and for the world. And really, if we want this to not happen again, we need to have some repercussions. We need something to happen and to go back on China. But if they just keep getting away with it, do we want another pandemic next year? I mean, they're not going to stop unless someone pushes back. That's how these far radical leftists work. This is a communist government we're talking about. We're talking about the worst of the worst, the most authoritarian, like terrible thing ever. So this is important to note, important to keep in mind. Remember what we're saying here. They're using this identity stuff against us. This historian believes it. I predicted this in another article about the reporters in a different way. This is more focused on the China side, and I think it makes a lot of sense. Kathy He is reporting here too, and she appears to be of Asian descent, covers U.S.-China news, says she's a proud Australian. I think that's what that flag is. I'm not sure what her actual background is. Maybe it'll say here. Says Kathy He is a New York-based reporter focusing on China-related topics. She previously worked as a government lawyer in Australia. She joined the Epoch Times in February 2018. Looks pretty legit. I guess we can assume maybe she's got a Chinese background, but that's besides the point. Those are just the players. We're talking about the game. We're talking about China trying to deceive us. Beijing, coming from their leaders, very manipulative. They will use any methods possible. They act like they're kind of these proud, calm, you get that Asian stereotype in there, these humble people kind of proud of their family people, but that's not the case. Communists kind of reject normal culture in their area. They try to turn people towards the state and make them these kinds of almost nationalists. Actually, they're more about like China for China, the People's Republic of China is what it's typically called. And yeah, it's a very communist, very bad way, but that's their expert. That's what these liberals do. They're really good at propaganda. They're good at pushing it and taking advantage of trends and using things like this identity politics thing that's really big in America. They knew that the SJWs, the leftists, the Democrats, they would all latch onto that, and they have. And that's why we've seen things like basically all of the mainstream media has become Chinese operatives. They're defending them every chance they could get. They're calling people racist for calling it the Chinese virus. They're calling them offensive. They're pretending that like Chinese Americans are getting attacked because Trump called it the China virus, even though I've never seen any proof of that. I've never seen any proof of any of this stuff they're talking about. All I see is a Far East nation trying to cover up their mistakes, trying to make sure that they don't look too bad on the world stage, even though I don't know how they could come back from this. This is just terrible to me. This is like unreturnable, but they were already bad before, so I think they're just kind of on their own. I mean, China has 1 billion people. They have a giant growing economy. They don't really need much from the rest of us, but they want it. They want world domination. That's the problem. Is like that's why they're expanding business. That's why they're uniting with other world organizations, other global places that have power across the world. Like they're trying to spread. They're not happy with their giant nation with 1 billion people. They want more. With these kinds of leaders, with these kinds of authoritarians, it's always more. If you're not growing, you're dying. And that's why we should consider them a threat. That's why we should say, hey, we need to step up. We need to speak out. We need to let the word go out. I mean, I think another problem is the censorship around this. Like, basically, I almost didn't even mention China and stuff like this for the last 6 months. It came up 6 months ago, too, when they were talking about China censoring our media. And I just had to try to not say that country. But at this point, I'm almost past that. I mean, I'll try not to mention it in other videos, but today it's like, let's get the message out there. Let's spread the word. I don't care if I'm getting censored. I'm saying this. I'm making this story happen. I want to hear what you guys think too. That wraps things up. Thanks for watching. Make sure you comment your thoughts on everything below. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video. And until next time, you guys have a great day.